Good morning. In this week's Parshat Shmot, we read about Pharaoh's attempts to destroy the Jewish people, starting with the murder, essentially, of Jewish babies. And he does something nefarious, is that he wants to recruit the midwives as his primary executioners. And the Torah tells us in beginning of Shmot, in chapter 1, about these two midwives named Shifra and Fua, who our sages tell us are actually Yocheved, Moshe's mother, and Miriam, his sister. And he tells them that they are to kill these Jewish children, Vayomer, and he says to them, Be'aledchen et Evriot, when you are assisting the Jewish women in giving birth, U'item ala v'nayim, and they're on the birthing stools, Beinu v'amiten. If it is a son, you must kill him. V'embati v'chaya. However, if it is a daughter, allow her to live. So again, he's telling them straight out, he's ordering them to murder these children. However, these midwives feared Hashem. They did not do what the king of Egypt instructed them to. Rather, they kept the boys alive. And Pharaoh calls them in and shouts at them, and they make excuses. But the Torah concludes this incident by saying, Vayitav Elokim lameyaldot. And Hashem did good. Hashem was good to these midwives. Vayarev ha'am. And the nation increased. V'atzmu me'od. And they became very many. Vayi chi yeru ha'meyaldot et Elokim. And it was because the nation feared Hashem, v'yas lehem batim, that he made for them houses, which we'll explain in a second. But the first point is there's something quite strange. Torah says Hashem did good to the midwives. The nation increased in number. And then it says, and because they feared Hashem, he gave them houses. So it says Hashem rewarded them. Then it seems to go off on a tangent, speaking about the way in which the nation increased. Then it comes back to reminding us why they're being given a reward, and then actually telling us the reward of the houses that they're given. It's a strange deviation. Rashi is sensitive to this question. Rashi says, V'yitav Elokim le'me'aldot, Hashem did good to these midwives. And he says, Mahu hatova, what was the good thing that Hashem did for them? V'yas le'em batim, making them houses. So he just kind of ignores the end of this verse and the beginning of the next verse to say, well, what can you do? It must be that that's what it's referring to. But Rabbi Moshe Feinstien suggests a wonderful answer, that he says these women were so committed to what was good and right for the Jewish people. They were so committed to what the Jewish people needed that the greatest reward for them was not their own personal benefit, but rather was something that would be good for the entire Jewish people. The greatest reward they could possibly have is that the Jewish people would be great and successful and numerous. They weren't interested in a personal reward. They weren't looking for something good in and of themselves. What they were looking for was that the nation should be good. Their identity was intrinsically linked with that of the Jewish people as a whole. And that is the way that Rabbi Shimon Shkop says in his introduction to one of his books. He says different people have different definitions of self. Some people's definition of their self is very narrow and very limited. It only revolves around them, and they're really only interested in what's good for them. Some people have a broader sense of self, a broader definition of their identity that includes their family, that includes those close to them. Others have an even broader definition of self. Others even go so far as to include friends, colleagues, perhaps even community. But the truly great people have a sense of self that encompasses their entire nation, sometimes even that encompasses the entire world. That was how great these two midwives were. The true reward for them was that the Jewish nation was successful and increased and was healthy. That was the greatest thing they could have asked for. However, Hashem also rewarded them, so to speak, on a personal level by building them these houses. Now, what are these houses? Rashi explains for us from our sages that he says he made them houses, Bate Kahuna Velavia Umalchut, the houses of the Kohuna, of the priestship, Leviah, of the Levites, Umalchut, and the kingdom. Shekarun Batim, which are called houses or dynasties. Hashem created dynasties for these women. That Yocheved, as we know, was the mother of Moshe and Aaron. Aaron is the father of all of the Kohanim throughout Jewish history. And Moshe is one of the primary Levi'im, and many of the Levitical families are descended from Moshe. And Miriam married a descendant of Yehuda, and it is from them that King David and the Jewish monarchy comes. So all of the three great echelons, all the three nobilities of the Jewish people, Kahuna, Leviah, and Malchut, priesthood, Levites, and the kingship, they all came from these two women, from Miriam and Yocheved. This was the great reward to them on a personal level. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstien, following the same theme, says these people, essentially this Jewish aristocracy, the kings, the Kohanim, the Levi'im, they are all dedicated towards community. The reason that Hashem chose to bring these three communities out of these Jewish women is because public leadership is really about public service. Being a great and an honored person amongst the Jewish people is being someone who serves and does good for others and is there and sensitive to the needs of others. And therefore, these great aristocracies that all came from these women had to come from these women, because these women were the ones who epitomized service of the community. Rabbi Moshe Feinstien says, when a person has a very difficult mitzvah, he says, for example, God forbid, a person's parent is not well, and they are tasked with looking after this parent and taking care of them in their sickness, and for years it's very difficult, and after many years of devoted and loving service, the parent passes away. He said it is quite natural and not at all bad if the child feels some sense of relief, if they feel that after all of this, my parents at peace and I can get on with my life and I don't have to carry on with this difficult task. A person can certainly be forgiven for thinking that. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstien says we could think the same thing with these midwives, that they could have said, so we've done our service, we have saved the Jewish children, we have not killed them, but it's okay if there aren't so many Jewish children born that we have to be placed in such a difficult situation. That was not their attitude. Their attitude was the more Jewish children, the better. The more the Jewish nation thrives and prospers, the better it will be. And if that means harder work for us and more difficulty, that's fine, because that's who they were. This wasn't just a cause they were committed to, but in terms of seeing who they were, of understanding themselves, they were the Jewish people. And what was good for the Jewish people was good for them. And what was good for them was only to be understood in terms of what was good for the broader Jewish community. And that's such an important thing to emphasize, to think about our sense of self, to think where it extends and how it extends, and how, as we become greater human beings, we can expand that circle of self to include more people, to want good for more people, to be committed to the benefit of others. And then we will truly achieve personal and communal greatness. Have a wonderful Shabbos.